Yaakov Lappin, thanks for joining us. You're the host of the Strategic Assessment podcast on Patreon. Also, you wrote an article about what's happening here in Israel. Many people seem to be concerned about the talks that have gone on in Oman last week and scheduled for this coming week. What are the concerns here in Israel about these talks?
I think the central concern, or the big unknown, is whether or not the Trump administration is going to insist during these negotiations with an uprooting or a total dismantlement of the nuclear program infrastructure in Iran. So rather than going down the route of past administrations and the 2015 nuclear agreement known as the JCPOA, which basically focused on stopping the enrichment activities, but it didn't take apart the nuclear infrastructure, those underground sites and their centrifuges in Natanz, in Fordo, and other sites across Iran. You know, what Prime Minister Netanyahu described as the Libya model, which is really destroying the very ability to enrich uranium and not just freezing the enrichment uranium process. That's the concern. That's the big unknown. And the other unknown, which I think, in recent days has become clear and is less of an unknown, is whether the Iranians will succeed or not in making this an open-ended, sort of endless, time-wasting endeavor, so that they can continue to basically make nuclear progress under the cover of having diplomatic talks. Now, that seems to be less likely because we've heard President Trump say that he's growing impatient and that he doesn't like the fact there's a week separating each round of talks. So I think, we can be more calm about that unknown. Mm-hmm. So that's the general picture as far as I think it's seen in Israel.
Given these circumstances, what do some people here in Israel believe that Israel needs to do?
Well, I think right now it's to give time and space for the Trump administration to lead these talks. We see that on the ground, there is very major preparations, both by the United States military and the Israeli Air Force, in terms of moving hardware into place in the event that these talks break down. So operationally, militarily, cooperation seems to be very good. Not only has the U.S. put 2 U.S. carrier strike groups into the region, and that's not just against the Houthis in Yemen. I think we can assume that that's also preparation for Iran scenarios. We know that there are heavy bombers, B-2s in Diego Garcia with bunker busters, very heavy bunker busters. And across the region, it seems that the U.S. is preparing, and it's doing that together with the Israeli Air Force through CENTCOM, which is the American military command that's responsible for the Middle East. So I think militarily, the situation is very promising in terms of cooperation, coordination. What's left is the political will. And the prime minister here is giving President Trump the time and the space to try out the negotiations. I think, that's really the Israeli decision based on the hope that once President Trump understands that the Iranians are not going to go along with dismantling their nuclear infrastructure, the decision for a military operation will be the next decision.
And how close right now are the Iranians from enriching uranium up to 90%, military grade, and other aspects of their nuclear program?
They're very close. They're already enriching to 60%. Now, to go from 60% to 90% is nothing. It's extremely easy. They've already done all of the heavy lifting when it comes to uranium enrichment. And in terms of how much they've enriched, well, this is the biggest problem. I mean, they have they're days away, less than a week, from being able to enrich enough military-grade uranium, which is 90% approximately, for one bomb. They can do that in less than 1 week. And if they use all of their centrifuges, some of which are advanced and spin faster, and their 60% uranium stockpiles, and they also have 20% uranium stockpile, they can make almost enough uranium for 10 nuclear bombs in a month. That's where they're at. Now, just to clarify for the viewers, that doesn't mean that they can make 10 nuclear bombs in a month. There's a difference between enriching enough uranium for a bomb and making the bomb. What they're lacking, according to the official intelligence assessments, is the nuclear warhead itself. As far as the Israeli and American intelligence communities are aware, they haven't built a nuclear warhead. They haven't been They haven't activated what they call the weapons group, which is the group of scientists and engineers who are responsible for taking that enriched uranium and turning it into a bomb. There's a whole series of steps that need to be taken. I won't go into the technicalities to do that. And the assumption or the assessment is that that weapons group hasn't been activated. Now, we don't know if that's true or not. That's the assessment. You know, it reminds me of the old phrase, the unknown unknowns, that I think Donald Rumsfeld used to talk about. But that's the assessment going forward. So they're still way too close. And even if you take the most conservative estimates, I read a lot of assessments by David Albright, who's a former weapons inspector for the UN, and he's one of the top experts on nuclear programs in the world. And he thinks that the Iranians within 6 months can put together a crude nuclear device, which is separate from, say, a proper nuclear weapon, an atomic bomb, which they're probably about a year away from. But even a crude nuclear device is a game-changing situation. That would be sufficient to make Iran a nuclear weapon state. So they're way too close. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. There's also a statement I've heard that we don't know what we don't know. Is it possible there could be some unknowns in their nuclear program that make them even much closer to a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to assume that there are some unknowns. Iran is a large country. And it's true that it's difficult to hide the breakout stage. It's something that's difficult to hide because it requires a lot of coordination. And my assumption is that the members of the weapons groups are under very tight surveillance, intelligence surveillance. Both the United States and Israel have satellites and an array of ways to keep tabs on the nuclear program. So I don't think the Iranians could break out easily without anybody knowing, but they can definitely start taking steps. And there have been reports about certain steps that have been taken by this so-called weapons group, with Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, pretending not to know about these steps while they inch forward. So the general direction is very clear. Iran is inching, it's crawling its way towards nuclear weapons. And I think it's also important to note, when we talk about the technicalities, why nuclear weapons are so important for the Iranian regime, for this fundamentalist jihadist regime. They want to extend a nuclear umbrella over basically a network or even an empire of proxies, and then use that umbrella to intimidate all of the countries that would be attacked by their proxies. Israel is, of course, the first target, but it would also be Sunni countries like Saudi Arabia, and basically back these proxies as they fight Iran's wars for them. So the 7th of October was a glimpse into what an Iranian proxy war looks like against Israel. Now imagine October 7th with a nuclear Iran, where they have an umbrella, a sort of North Korea in the region, threatening nuclear weapons attacks if their proxies are attacked. And that's what they're after. That's their vision. They view it as a core principle of their attempt to take over the Middle East, destroy the state of Israel, bring down pro-American Sunni governments. And that's just stage one, by the way. They have global aspirations. So this is extremely dangerous for the whole of international security. And of course, Israel is the first target, but by no means the last. This is what they want nuclear weapons for. And that's why it's absolutely vital that they cannot move ahead with that program.
Yeah. You talked about the weapons, the military hardware that's been amassed in the region. How effective can a strike by the U.S. and Israel be on Iran's nuclear program?
Well, if it's a combined strike, I think it would be extremely effective. I mean, the U.S. alone has unmatched, globally firepower. It can bring down really just unprecedented levels of ordnance, munitions, massive, 20,000 bombs, 30,000 bombs, bunker busters that can penetrate very deep into the ground. I mean, the U.S. alone can do this. Now, we've heard President Trump talk about the fact that if this comes to a military operation, he would envisage Israel leading it. And I think that that's a realistic assessment, because I think the administration would want Israel to take the lead role. And Israel itself is absolutely capable. Of course, it has less in the domain of heavy bunker busters, because you need strategic bombers to deliver those. Israel doesn't have strategic stealth bombers like B-2s like the U.S., but But Israel has spent years practicing with its F-35s, F-15s, F-16s, drones, and other capabilities on how to deliver its own heavy munitions towards in the direction of nuclear facilities in Iran. Now, another thing that's worth noting is that the Israeli Air Force is the only Air Force that has recently gained experience in taking over Iran's skies. And it did that in October last year in response to a massive Iranian ballistic missile attack. And the IAF was active all over Iran. It was unchallenged. It took out most of Iran's air defenses. It struck a range of targets, including one reportedly that is linked to the nuclear program in Parchin. So the Israeli Air Force has already got its proof of concept. It knows how to get to Iran. It knows how to be active all over Iran's territory if necessary. And I think that was a very important proof of concept that's going to boost the confidence of the Israeli Air Force, the decision makers, the aviators, in terms of capabilities.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Yaakov. Any final thoughts?
Well, I think this is the biggest issue. What we're talking about this morning here is really the biggest issue going forward, because if Iran is denied nuclear weapons, then I think the future of the region is going to, there'll be a good basis for hope that the jihadists will lose. But if Iran is allowed through negligence or failure of policy to become a nuclear weapon state, I think that's going to have a multi-generational and catastrophic effect, first on the Middle East, and then it's going to spread out globally. Iran's going to link up with enemies of America, and we'll have a very dark and dangerous world. So a lot is hanging on this, and this is not just about Israeli security. It's first and foremost about Israeli security, but this is about the future of the world.
Well, stakes seem like they couldn't be higher. Yaakov Lappin, strategic host of the Strategic Assessment Podcast on Patreon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you.